Hello, I am Anawoltos, and today we're going to be doing a little bit of another article critique, that is, from the Huffington Post here. I am still pretty sick. In fact, right now I have a cough drop in my mouth because my throat infection has spread to my ear, and it hurts quite a bit. And as such, due to that distraction from the pain, I'm not going to be doing any gaming content today. Or at least until I get a little bit better, because otherwise I think I'll be too distracted and perhaps too distracting as well. So yes, that does mean that this is indeed secondary content. For those of you who really do enjoy this content, that's fine as well. Okay, this article is by Nadine Smith, a contributor to the Huffington Post, and according to this, a Florida-based civil rights organizer, an LGBT advocate, and executive director of Equality Florida. Now, for those of you who don't know, I actually live in Florida, so this is a little bit relevant to me. So let's see what this article is about. It's a movement, not a mob. Let us be unflinching and wise. Published on the 22nd of November, 2017. Okay. And they have a picture here. That classic image of justice with the scales and the sword. So let's see what it says here. And it begins with a quote. "Then tell wind and fire where to stop," returned Madame. "But don't tell me, Madame de Farge, A Tale of Two Cities." Now, I haven't read that book, so I don't know how to pronounce that. And also, French is not one of the languages I know. So for anyone who's upset about that pronunciation, let me just give my excuse. So anyway, let's begin. "I fear simple-mindedness may cause us to fumble the opportunity for a true reckoning with sexual harassment, exploitation, and violence in America." And you know what? I agree. I think it's very important to be very rational about these things, to think things out before you make any bold moves, before you make bold accusations. I think that's a very agreeable statement, that first sentence. "Powerful men who thought themselves invincible have begun to fall, and you can feel the earth tremble as others not yet unmasked shift uneasily on their thrones." Man, that's a bit poetic there, getting a bit hyperbolous to some extent. So let's see what exactly we're talking about here. "But already the right has begun to exploit the left's self-conscious earnestness and its tendency to allow self-righteousness to outrun discernment." So there's a couple statements being put in here. There's the right is exploiting the left's weaknesses here, which are self-conscious earnestness, so they're very self-conscious, and they allow their self-righteousness to outrun discernment. And you know what? I think that happens on both sides of the aisle. I think that's something that happens on both sides of the aisle, and something that I think both sides really take advantage of. But in this specific context, the article writer here is saying that it's the right exploiting the left. "We are inundated with hyperventilating think pieces that embrace a reflexive moral flattening so that a bawdy joke and molesting an 8th grader fall into the same category of misconduct." Yeah, and you know what? I think that's true. There are people who get ideological to an extent that they don't make distinctions. They don't make for proper categories when addressing political issues and having discernment between someone making a joke and someone making a serious statement. I think that if with enough information, you should always be able to tell the difference. And oftentimes people just don't want to look deep enough to tell the difference. But that being said, I also do agree with the idea that a joke about molesting an 8th grader is also wrong, but not on the same level as actually molesting an 8th grader. You know, I think there is such a thing as taking a joke too far, as having bad taste. So, yeah, I do agree that this is something that is happening. But that being said, there are people who take things to such an extreme that not only do they not discern between an actual member of a movement and a troll, they then end up conflating the properties of those two groups onto each other, believing that the troll is actually a member of a certain group, or believing that a troll's caricature of a certain group actually is accurate to that group. And we do see that happen quite a lot with the media, especially when they are analyzing internet culture. We shuffle us closer to Trump and Moore's only defense. If everyone is a criminal, then no one is. And you know what? I think that is a very slanted statement, if you ask me. And I know what you're saying here, but the problem here is that you're implying that Trump is already convicted as a criminal for something, or that Moore is already convicted as a criminal for something, which neither of them are at the current point in time. And I haven't seen the evidence for these things, so I can't really comment on that. But unless you actually present the evidence, I think that there's really no way you can say that that is the only defense they have. For example, Moore's defense, or at least Trump's defense of Moore, has been that Moore has been saying that these things didn't happen. And I think from a legal standpoint in the United States, that is a valid defense, saying that if there is no evidence that a crime actually occurred, then we can't really operate on the assumption that a crime has occurred. Now, that being said, I don't know what the evidence is in the case, and there may be evidence, there may not be. I don't know. But I do think that this statement already pre-convicts Trump and Moore in the mind of a writer without actually presenting a reasonable warrant to do so. So I think it definitely is jumping the gun quite a bit, especially in the case of Trump, who currently isn't that involved in being accused of these legal issues as much as Moore is. As a woman, okay, so the writer is a woman, I have seen victims of sexual harassment and violence be mocked, shamed, dismissed, and dehumanized my whole life. Now, I don't know what being a woman has relevance to being able to see these things happen. I'm pretty sure men can see these things happen, and depending on your point of view, intersex individuals, and if you believe that gender is non-binary, you could say that transsexuals have seen these things happen as well. I don't really see any real reason that there's to emphasize that the writer is a woman here and that this is a woman's perspective, because these things are all things that people from every perspective can see. I mean, what I'm saying here is a man can see a woman being sexually harassed, and a man can see a woman being mocked, shamed, dismissed, and dehumanized, and also want to stop that. And the fact that the writer brings up the gender here implies to me that the writer is trying to use that as either a political or ideological tool. Now, I don't know if the writer is going to go in that direction, so let's move on. It is clear, judging from posts I see on social media, even in this breakthrough moment, that those techniques aren't going away. The techniques of mocking, shaming, dismissing, and dehumanizing individuals for being victims of sexual harassment or violence, or victims of sexual harassment and violence being mocked, shamed, dismissed, or dehumanized for perhaps other reasons. Now, again, if we're talking about Trump and Moore here, we need to recognize that if Moore is innocent, then that means these people aren't actually victims of sexual harassment and violence. In which case, the entire point is it requires that Moore is already guilty for that to make sense. And to be honest, I completely and entirely disapprove and condemn mocking, shaming, dismissing, and dehumanizing anyone, really, to be honest. It doesn't. You don't even have to be a victim of sexual harassment and violence. If you're just a random person on the street, I'm not going to go on mocking people, because you know what? That's a mean thing to do. You know, that's not cool. You're not being a bro. So, and honestly, I don't think that these things are going away, because that's just how people are. People are mean, and that's the way life is. So there's not much you can really do about that. I mean, of course, you can curb it a bit by encouraging people in your community to have ethical standards so that they don't go around being mean to people. I think that's a fair thing to do. But I don't think you should force people to behave in a certain manner that that forbids them from insulting someone. Even though I do think insulting people is wrong, I don't think that you should force someone to not insult someone, because an insult is a word, and it isn't actually causing direct physical or financial harm to someone unless you take it to a certain level. So anyway, next step here. As a black woman, I know of a long history of the status quo weaponizing accusations of sexual misconduct to derail leaders and incite racial violence. Okay, I get what the writer is saying now. The writer is saying that as a woman, I have extra reason to have seen these things. As in, I should know. So you're using your identity as a point of authority, which, to be honest, not every black woman has seen these things. There are black women who don't know the long history of the status quo weaponizing accusations of sexual misconduct to derail leaders and incite racial violence. But let's actually take a look at this statement here. The long history of the status quo weaponizing accusations of sexual misconduct to derail leaders and incite racial violence. Okay. So there's an example here. Emmett Till is simply the most famous case, but not nearly the only or most recent. So I personally don't think that this statement is entirely accurate in what it's trying to say here. Weaponizing accusations of sexual misconduct to derail leaders and incite racial violence. We're talking about accusations of sexual misconduct leading to racial violence. And I personally think that the concept of sexuality and race aren't intrinsically linked here, which means that there must be an in-between step somewhere where we're getting to. It's, for example, the reason in the United States you need a marriage license. Historically, one of the reasons why that was instituted is because people wanted to prevent interracial marriage is something that people wanted to prevent. And that is one reason why in the United States there exist marriage licenses, and as a result, it is also... I personally don't think that it's necessary for the government telling people that they're allowed to be married. I think that's just something that people generally should be allowed to do, to marry each other. So I don't think you really should have to ask the government's permission to do that. So I can see maybe it's in there, maybe outlawing people to mix races, but I don't really see that happening today very often. So I can't really... I don't know about Emmett Till. I don't know who Emmett Till is, so I can't really comment on that. But I generally don't see sexual misconduct leading to racial violence. I generally don't see that, not in today's society anyway. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's an example. Maybe someone can tell me in the comments below that this is something that happens all the time, because honestly, I don't think it is. As a lesbian, I know the speed with which attackers of gay men and trans women in particular have justified their violence by the implication of an unwanted sexual overture. Okay, so what the writer is saying here is that people have physically attacked, have assaulted gay men and trans women because the gay men and trans women were propositioning them. And I personally think that being propositioned is not a warrant to use physical violence. If you're being propositioned, just go away. So anyone who actually behaves in that manner, just cool off and go away. That's just walk away. My point is this: let us be unflinching and wise, okay? All accusers deserve their charges to be taken seriously. Okay, I agree with that. I think it's important to take an accusation seriously. And the reason it's important to take accusations seriously is to prevent people from making false accusations and abusing the system. Because if you make a serious accusation, then you should also be able to be held accountable for your accusation. And if you seriously and intentionally make a false accusation and plead in court for that, then you should be held accountable for perjury. So people should be taken seriously so that they can be held accountable for what they say, and not dismissed or minimized. And you know what? That's right. All accused deserve the opportunity to respond to the charges. You know what? This person knows how the law works. That's right. You deserve the opportunity to respond to the charges. And in fact, you deserve, in this country, in the United States, you deserve to have the opportunity, or actually, you have the legally guaranteed right to be considered innocent until proven guilty. So the burden of proof is on the accuser, which is another reason to take the accuser's charges seriously. Anyway, trust women isn't a cry for pitchforks and torches. Okay, fair enough. Well, I think it depends. Well, I'm not talking about the second part of the sentence here, just so that no one gets confused. Trust women. I think that it's fair enough to have a presumption of honesty in a court of law until someone is proven guilty of perjury. But that being said, the greater weight should be placed on the defendant, so that the accuser needs to bring the burden of proof out, and the defendant has the high ground to prevent the accusers from abusing the system and disproportionately convicting innocent individuals, which could potentially happen if the legal system favors the accuser. And some people assume that trust women goes to the point that, I got a cough again, that you assume that the story is true to the extent that the defendant is, technically speaking, in your mind already guilty. And from a legal standpoint, that is not a good attitude to have. So I would say you should trust the accusations to be serious, but you should also trust the defendant to be serious as well. And the burden of proof has to be on the accuser. Isn't a cry for pitchforks and torches. And I'm glad that someone is pointing that out to a lot of these people, that this isn't something you should be getting militant over. You should be calm and reasonable. In the unleashed and righteous fury of this moment, discernment is beginning to gasp for air. Yes, I'm glad it is. It is possible, in fact necessary, to say trust women and also support a rational process for the accused. If by rational process for the accused you mean to imply the presumption of innocence. Take all charges seriously, investigate honestly, hold accountable regardless of station. And you know what? That's good. Let this be a massive movement for justice that uproots the scourge of sexual abuse, without uprooting the legal process and the presumption of innocence. But let us take care not to be manipulated into turning a movement into a mob unable to discern what justice is. And this, all too often, is what happens in some of these movements. For example, look at what happened with Black Lives Matter. There were mobs going around the streets. There were some people who were vandalizing property. And that really undermines the credibility of the movement when stuff like that happens. So I call on people, members of any movement, to always be rational and to never be mobby. Never turn into a mob. Always be rational. Always be reasonable. Always know where you are in relation to justice, so that you don't end up going off track. And you know what? This article, although I come from a completely different point of view, and I disagree with a lot of the places where this article is coming from, I think the overall point of this article is actually pretty good. And you know what? I think that's a great thing. I'm happy, although you may not be able to tell it because I'm a bit sick, and that causes me quite a bit of pain, but I'm happy that I'm actually seeing someone on this side of the issues who is taking this kind of position. Although, let's be honest, if you're saying Trump and Moore's only defense is that everyone is a criminal, then no one is, I think you definitely, that is probably the most disagreeable statement that I have in here, because it goes against the presumption of innocence here. But for the rest of the article, it's actually pretty good. So you know what? You actually get a vote of semi-confidence from me. No vote of no confidence, no vote of full confidence, because let's be honest, I completely disagree with many of your presuppositions. But virtue-wise, relating to justice, I think that you may be on the right track. Hopefully someday in the future you change your mind on some things, and Anyone watching this, do not harass this individual. Do not send spam to this individual. Always be respectful in your interactions with both people you agree and people you disagree with. Sorry about that. If anyone wants to co-host a critique of an article so that we can have some dialogue on these things, I don't care what side of a political issue you are on, as long as you're willing to be respectful, I'm happy to do that. So anyway, thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. If you have anything to say, please do so in the comments section below. And I will be seeing you all next time. Adawiltos over and out.